This is the lecture for Friday, 28th May, 2021, for Ancient and Medieval History. We'll start with a short round of questions, if you have them, about things you observed in the movie that didn't make any sense. How many groups? Yes.
Okay, so that guy was blind.
Yes.
How did all that work with them?
Because he knew the monastery. He didn't, I think, start blind. He became blind over time. So he knew the monastery and the library like the back of his hand. And in his blindness, like many people who suffer a health problem that changes the way they live, he's bitter about it. And his bitterness takes the form of a thoroughgoing hatred of laughter, hatred of humor, hatred of joy. So when he finds Aristotle's second book of Poetics, a book that will glorify humor and laughter in an intellectual fashion, his response is to hide it. And when it's found, to poison it. You will notice that all of them wet their fingers before turning the page. That's a disgusting habit, by the way, in my personal opinion. But we have paper pages. It's fairly easy to turn a paper page without moistening your fingers. They were using vellum, which is like sheepskin. And I can only suppose, because I've never spent a lot of time around vellum pages, that given the nature and texture of the vellum, that moistening your fingers will make it significantly easier to grab the page and to turn it. That's what I think. Then again, ancient people, like in Roman times, when they read, they didn't read in silence. You get a person today alone reading a book, you're not going to hear them unless they're being silly. You'll see them reading, because we read silently. That's something that comes out of the Middle Ages. The ancients, the Greeks and the Romans, when they read things, even when they were alone, they tended to read them out loud. It was just the way they tended to do things. Can't believe I haven't told you this until now, but I don't think I have. So the fashion of reading out loud whenever you read ebbed, went away, was replaced by silent reading unless you're reading to people. The tradition, perhaps, of moistening your fingers before you turn a page may also just have been the norm back then, and when you come into modern times and printed books, that begins to change. I don't know. How many groups of religious were there? Religious are the orders.
Two, right?
Well,
Monks and
Franciscans.
Franciscans?
Yeah. Okay, that's two. That's the first two. So we've got the Benedictine monks who follow the order of St. Benedict, poverty, chastity, obedience. They live under the authority of their abbot, and they live the lifestyle of hermits together. Second group of the Franciscan friars. I'm going to talk more about them, but leave it to say now. St. Francis of Assisi is as close to the modern idea of a gentle saint as you're going to get. This is a guy who spent time healing animals. This is a guy who spent his life with people that no one else would pay attention to. People so poor they were starving. People so hideously ugly that nobody wanted to spend time with them. He spent time around, like Jesus did, among the sick and among the despised. But Francis, even more so, says that it's a Christian duty to try to modify or ameliorate the poverty, the preventable suffering that these people are going through. So if you tend to be a left-leaning person, think poverty is something that you can fix, Francis of Assisi is a good role model. Even as a conservative, I admire the man, and I admire what he did, the purity of his vision, to live a life of egocentric service, of completely selflessness. And Franciscans still do that. The current Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, a person who I don't like nearly as much as I liked Pope Benedict or John Paul, but the current Pope is a former Jesuit, you'll learn about them next year, who used the name Francis to indicate that his papacy would be about trying to fight poverty. And so if you're a Catholic or if you know anything about Roman Catholics, you will know that the current Pope is very much involved in trying to help people who are suffering from starvation or no medical care or a lack of proper housing or any of the good lack of clean water. The Catholic Church is much more involved in that thanks to him, and he took the name Francis because Francis was like that. However, there was a third and fourth group of religious that aren't so common, that weren't so much a part of the film.
Okay,
One of
so I think at least one of them was those people that were in like the red and white.
Yes, those were the papal representatives. They were papal people, and the papal people, the ones wearing the red and white, that was a cardinal. A cardinal is a super bishop. A cardinal is one of the few people on earth who can elect the next pope. And usually, especially back in the Middle Ages, cardinals tend to be very wealthy. They tend to contribute a lot of money through their families to the church, and they tend to wield a lot of political power. So the third group are the papal delegation, or the papal representatives. They are personal representatives of the Pope. They are priests rather than members of monastic orders, and their job is to serve the interests of the papacy, which in the Middle Ages was competing with the kings for supreme control. The idea of the church giving up its money, squandering it as they would call it, on the poor, who Jesus said would be with us always, is anathema to them. This movie shows them as fat, corrupt, self-serving, rude jackanapes. They were not portrayed in anything like a sympathetic light, and I can understand why. Because these people, as depicted anyway, were interested in nothing more than holding on to their own power, which includes money as well as political power. There was a fourth group, represented particularly by a single fellow.
It's the like.
What does he wear?
Kinda.
What?
It's like the cult kind of, right? I can't
Yeah.
remember the name though.
Bernardo Gui is the Inquisitor, and he is from the Dominican Order of Preachers. Now, the Dominican Order of Preachers is maligned a little bit by Bernardo being such a lousy person. I mean, when he fell on those spikes, when I first saw the movie, it made me happy. It was justice. Here's how it starts. St. Dominic is a pastor and a scholar who ends up becoming a chaplain during the Albigensian Crusade. He personally walks into the Albigensian lands with the knights that are suppressing it. He sees with his own eyes the slaughter, the no mercy, no quarter on both sides. He sees the human cost, and he prays to God and comes up with an insight or a revelation, depending upon how you view these things. His insight or revelation is this: all of this suffering is preventable. All of it came from a misreading of the Bible. Had the people who established the Cathari, had the people who were the leaders of the Albigensians, who, remember, were educated churchmen and noblemen, had they understood that the Bible did not mean social revolution, that Jesus did not preach a hatred for the rich or for anyone else as a group for that matter. He didn't like the Pharisees and Sadducees much, but even then, there were Pharisees and Sadducees, Sadducees like St. Matthew, Pharisees like Nicodemus, and Joseph of Arimathea, who as individuals stood out. Jesus never said hate for any group of people. Had those people who established the Cathari understood the Bible as well as they thought they did, they would never have done what they did. They would never have launched a social revolution. They would never have descended into the kind of violence that forced people to either give up their homes or get burned out in them. So he decided, he prayed on it, and he believed God called him to spend the rest of his life learning theology and teaching the genuine Word of God, the Orthodox Word of God as understood by the Church. The Dominicans were set up to do two things. One, understand what the Bible really meant. And in doing so, the church could be guided to a more biblical interpretation of Christianity. Because even St. Dominic admitted that the church had gone on, had gone a bit away from that, a bit away from the scriptural basis of things. But the most important job of the Dominicans is to spread the word of God in the Orthodox interpretation of that word among everyone, among the educated nobility, among the educated clergy, among the nobility and the warrior class, among the craftsmen, and among those common people who were willing to listen. Dominic deeply believed in teaching, the power of teaching to make the world a better place by showing people how to think well. As a teacher, when I was confirmed a Roman Catholic when I was 14, I took the patron saint name of Jude Thaddeus, who's the patron saint of the Irish, of policemen, of lost causes. Sort of an interesting saint. At this point, and I'm not a Catholic anymore, I'm a Protestant, but at this point, were I to do that again, I might very well choose St. Dominic. Because I'm a teacher, because like him, I believe that what I'm doing is not a complete waste of time. You may not think of much of what we've done here this year, or you might, but you never know when it'll come in handy. And it could come in handy in ways that you, at this moment, cannot imagine. I've had people come back and tell me how it has helped them. So, like Dominic, I believe in teaching. In any event, the order of preachers are set up by Dominic, with papal approval. But something else is also set up to prevent another Albigensian crusade, to prevent another group of Cathari coming along. That is the Holy Inquisition. Now, the Holy Inquisition is also known as the Roman Inquisition in Italy, and in Spain, famously later, it will become the Spanish Inquisition. And the Spanish Inquisition is one of those organizations in history that just has an awful, obscenely bad, satanic reputation, because the Spanish Inquisition does some pretty awful things in order to persecute any Jew that says he's going to become a Christian, but who doesn't really become a Christian. So, the Inquisition is begun, as is said in this movie, for a good purpose. Let's say for a moment that you are, to the best of your knowledge, understanding the Bible to say something that could lead people to take action. You believe in your interpretation, not as a controversial thing, but as the truth. And the people who follow you are persuaded by your arguments. However, I get word, I'm in the Inquisition, or I'm a Dominican, or whatever. I get word of what you're saying, and I figure out where it's probably going to lead. So the Inquisition will invite you, or possibly even arrest you, depending upon whether you go willingly or not, but will invite you to come and will then give you a chance to explain your point of view, and then they'll consider it, and usually what they'll end up doing is explain where Orthodox Church teaching says that your interpretation isn't quite right. You are then given an opportunity to consider it, and if you end up agreeing with the Orthodox Church interpretation, you can recant. You can say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, don't listen to what I said, and everything is fine. If, after being corrected, you refuse to recant, and you double down that your interpretation is right and the church is wrong, at that point there may be a problem. But that's the original model. The model is also of a teaching institution. A good-intentioned nun, which you'd have to be, maybe you're an abbess, a good-intentioned nun would come up with, or priest or monk or whoever, believer, would come up with an idea that's a new interpretation of Scripture, or a new interpretation of Christianity. And they would be given the opportunity to come to the Inquisition and present that. The inquisitors would consider what they said, and then the inquisitors would make a decision. Now, they are authorized by the church to make that call. And at that point, once the church has spoken, the person can say, okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong, don't listen to what I said, recant. Or they can fight it. And if they fight it at that point, to prevent you from leading souls astray, you might be imprisoned. Or worse, depending upon how vehement you are. So that's how the Inquisition starts. But man, Shakespeare rightly said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what he means by that is total power totally corrupts. If you see The Lord of the Rings or read it, which is better, there's a moment where Frodo offers Galadriel of Lothlorien the One Ring. Well, you're wise, you're beautiful, you take the ring. And there's this moment, which has become a meme, where this beautiful elven queen becomes a demon. You would replace a dark lord with a queen who's beautiful and terrible. All shall love me and despair. And then she comes back to herself and says, I've passed the test. I refuse the ring. Because there are certain things that you can't use without it corrupting you. The power and trust that's given to the Inquisition is so great that it creates a vanity, an intellectual vanity among the inquisitors. They end up not seeing them as being entrusted with a terrible responsibility. Terrible as in very, very, very weighty. Their responsibility is to interpret the true meaning of Holy Scripture for the entire church. That's a big deal. They begin to think that whatever they say is what the church should believe. Instead of being humble and saying, what does God want me to do? What does Scripture say we should do? What does church law say we should do? They begin shooting from the hip. They begin authorizing policies not based on anything other than their personal convictions. In other words, the inquisitors soon become less noble than you were, because you, with the best of intentions, were trying to speak what you thought was a newly revealed truth. They will then try to suppress that truth, not because they've considered it seriously, but because it just varies with what you say, or with what they say, and they're prideful, and they don't want to deal with having to argue about it. There are analogs today. There are arguments in science that people who are powerful try to suppress. I remember 20 years ago when string theory was a big deal. And they haven't yet proven it, and there are reasons for that, and there are some fundamental problems with string theory. But you wouldn't believe when it was first mentioned how many professional academic scientists and professional corporate scientists came together and said this is nonsense. Not because they'd examined the evidence, not because they'd given it a fair hearing, but because their careers were rooted in quantum mechanics, the previous and current understanding of physics. And string theory challenged what they did their work in. String theory challenged their professional status and the status of their point of view. So they tried squishing it. They tried squelching it. The same thing is done for the large number, but not the majority, but there's still a significant number of professional scientists, both academic and corporate, who do not accept man-made climate change the way it's touted in the political and cultural realms. They do not see it as persuasive science. But for reasons of politics, and for reasons of grant money, and for reasons of professional stature, many of them have been driven out of the university. Some of them, not as many, have been driven out of their corporate positions because they do not toe the line. Science, instead of becoming a means of inquiry, becomes a religion that has doctrine and dogma of orthodox interpretations and heresies. And both string theory and a healthy doubt about man-made climate change are both considered heresies by the establishment that exists in corporations and in universities that are the scientific establishment. That's not the way science is supposed to work, and it's not the way the Inquisition was supposed to work, but that's the way it ended up working. The Inquisition becomes synonymous with injustice, with torture, with getting people in front of them and forcing them against their will to admit that 2 + 2 = 3. To admit that wrong is right, that black is white, that up is down, that day is night. To speak untruth, knowing that it's untruth, knowing that it matters, and to make them do it because the Inquisition can. Because to dispute an inquisitor is ultimately seen to be disputing the church and disputing God. That's what you saw in Bernardo Luis, a corrupted Dominican, corrupted by the power that the Inquisition was entrusted with, who instead of viewing it as a teaching tool, viewed it as a way of punishing anyone who stood up against it. Bernardo is the kind of fellow, and I'm sure you've met them, but if you haven't, you will. Bernardo thinks he's the smartest person in the room in every room he's in, which nobody is. And Bernardo thinks that anyone who disagrees with him is stupid or evil, which is a fanatic's point of view. So Bernardo punishes anyone who stands up to it because he's a bully. All of this is brought out by the power that was given to this man, which corrupted it. Are there any other questions or observations you have about the interaction of these 4 groups, or anything else you saw in the movie?
What about the Hunchback?
The Hunchback was a former Albigensian, a former Cathari. In the book, they're called Dulcinites because there's a particular brother named Dolcino, Raggio Dolcino, who espouses a variant of Albigensianism that's basically communist social revolution. Kill the rich, take their stuff, and if the rich apologize sufficiently, they can live among you, but you don't ever really trust them. So, penitenze agite, which I don't know what it means because I don't speak Latin, but I can guess that it means, yes.
I looked it up,
Oh,
and
good.
it means like do penance, basically, and that was like, but it was like in the Bible they kind of reinterpreted it and said like live life as a pauper, basically.
Yeah.
And that was like their little catchphrase slogan thing.
Cool. Thank you. If you write that up, you'll get extra credit if you haven't already. The point of it all is to demand that everyone be poor. And if you don't willingly give yourself up over of your status, of your position, of your wealth, of your power, they'll take it from you. That's not really a Christian point of view. Christ got angry at the money changers. He didn't organize assassinations. He didn't organize mobs to riot. He didn't organize wars. So that is considered by most Christians to be heretical, to be false teaching. Does that make sense? Okay. And he survived, which is unusual, by hiding and by working with Remigio. And they both together basically insinuated themselves and were allowed into the Benedictine monastery. The Benedictines absolutely did not stand for the poverty of the church. Benedictine monasteries are some of the wealthiest organizations around in those days. But it was a place where they could live out the rest of their lives without being persecuted. But the temptation to go back, well, you saw. Yes?
Okay, so that reached him a go.
Remigio.
Yeah, that guy.
The guy with the beard.
Yeah, so he was like bad.
Oh, he was also one, yeah.
Okay.
He and the Hunchback had been, Dulcinites had been Albigensians, Cathari together. And they were a team. The Hunchback did what he could for Remigio. Remigio kept his eye out for the Hunchback. They protected one another because they both had the same secret.
And the other question, so the guy that like during that entire scene between like the groups,
Yep.
and that one guy that came in to tell William about the book or something.
Yeah, he was the herbalist.
Okay, so the guy that was also looking over the bodies whenever they found a new
He was the herbalist, yeah, and he was a Benedictine.
Okay, because I was a bit confused by that.
He was sort of a good guy, I thought, but he ultimately couldn't resist the temptation of the book. So, good. Anyway, thank you for your... Oh, yes.
What was John's?
Well, let's see. One of them was to copy books. One of them was to pray. Believe it or not, prayer is a duty, if you're a monk. And the third duties, you could have said working in the kitchen, slaughtering the pigs, collecting the blood, operating the baths, or doing any of the other things that keep the monastery functioning. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, one time I said like, obviously transcribing books and whatever, and translating it, and I said the slaughtering and stuff, and I said, like, because they obviously gave their scraps, I guess, for poor.
Yeah.
Would that be a job?
I wouldn't call it a job, but it could be called one, so that'll count.
Okay.
Giving alms to the poor. Yeah, that's a duty of the faithful. Alms is a catch-all phrase for charity. So they would throw their garbage down the chute, and the poor would get it, and they'd consider themselves good people because they gave the poor something to eat, even if the something was trash. It's still better than nothing, I am sure they would say. Okay. I don't see any other hands. That's good. Again, you've got until Tuesday. In Spain, you have an entirely different experience than anywhere else. And I'm using Spain for the land of Iberia. Basically, everything south and west of the Pyrenees Mountains in this part of Europe. Spain, remember, had been conquered by the Arabs early in their time as conquerors, except for an area in the Cantabrian Alps in the very north of Spain. Up here in these tall mountains, Christians hold out. So while the rest of Iberia is Muslim, and while the Muslims are attacking into France, these Christian kingdoms hold out. They are the basis of medieval kingdoms called Leon and Castile, Navarre, and ultimately Aragon. Not Aragorn, not Aragon, Aragon. From the time of Muslim maximum rule, when Seville was this incredible place with baths and libraries that they dream about, Christians began what was called Reconquista. And what Reconquista is reconquest. It is a Christian crusade in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, that lasts a very long time. Reconquista begins in the 700s AD, when these Christian kingdoms are holding out. It ends in 1492, with the final expulsion of the Moriscos, the Moors, the Muslims, from southern Spain. It was because of that victory that Columbus was given his ships. Without the conquest of the Moriscos, of the Moors in Spain, the Spanish queen would not have felt so happy and generous as to blow some money on the crazy Italian guy. So, this is a 700-year-long crusada, or crusade, Reconquista. And what it's about is fighting to reclaim this land for Christ from the Muslims. Now, the Christians become very good at war. And like all societies that are in this wrestling match of war, they're intimate. If you ever did wrestling in gym class or whatever, you know how intimate it is. You smell the other person. You smell their breath, you smell their BO, you feel their sweat. It's just you're on top of them, they're on top of you, and you're grappling with one another. It's an intimate thing. When two societies do that for long enough, there's a lot of exchange. So, for example, there's a reason why Spaniards tend to have darker eyes and darker hair than most other Europeans. Can anyone guess why? Just say it.
Like, because the Moors and then the Spanish had children.
The Spanish have Arab blood. So do Sicilians, by the way. In Sicily, the Arabs ruled for some time. And Arabs have noticeably darker hair and darker skin and darker eyes than the Europeans. So the really, really, really dark features that come in some Southern Europeans come straight out of Arabia. With this physical cross-pollination between Visigoths and Celtiberians and Romans, who are Spanish Christians, and their Arab opponents, comes some cultural exchanges. For example, Spanish soldiers routinely wear silk with their armor because they can get silk from the conquered areas and from trading with, because the Spanish, when they're not fighting the Moors, the Muslims, are trading with them. There are times of war and there are times of peace, and in times of peace you trade, and in times of war you fight. And for 700 years, this becomes incredibly complex. So Arab ideas from the height of their civilization, their ideas about medicine and cleanliness, the Arab math of algebra, the Arab diet, which includes spiced foods and a variety of foods, Arab hygiene, which involves being clean, not as clean as we are, because they don't have hot and cold running water almost everywhere, but still, by medieval standards, oh God, they're much cleaner, because they capture the Arab baths intact. And the Arabs, unlike the Europeans, didn't forget how to make hot baths. And Toledo steel. Toledo is a city in central Spain, in Castile. And in Toledo, they made a kind of steel that was flexible and strong, that made great swords, great armor. Toledo steel is something we don't know how to make anymore. We lost the formula. It's like Roman concrete. The Romans built things out of concrete. 2,000 years later, it's still standing. We build things out of concrete. 70 years later, it's falling apart because our concrete lacks something that the Romans included in theirs. We just don't know how to make it. We don't know how to make Greek fire. The exact substance that the Byzantines used to shoot fire at their enemy, we don't know how to make that. And we don't know how to make Toledo steel. There is a particular element to the equation that we just don't understand right now. So the Spaniards get all of these things slowly through conquest and through trade. Over hundreds of years of this back and forth, trading, fighting, breeding, trading, fighting, breeding, trading, fighting, breeding, the Spaniards, the Spanish Christians, and the Moriscos, the Spanish Muslims, end up having more in common with one another than they do with people outside of Spain in Christendom or in the Islamic world, which is something that occasionally is recognized. Now, what makes it harder is that there are waves and waves of new Muslims coming in to keep the fight going. If it was just the Spanish Muslims that were there at the height of the Spanish civilization, the Muslim civilization in Spain, they probably would have come to an accommodation with the Spaniards. But from North Africa, reinforcements come. The Almoravids, for example, they come to fight. They're not going to compromise with any stinking pig-eating Christian. And you silly Arabs here, you just have fallen from the true path. So the war is rejuvenated by outsiders who come in and who insist that the differences are more important than the similarities. Now, the kingdoms that develop, Leon is in northern western Spain. Castilla is in northern central Spain, and it goes right into the center of Spain, and it becomes the heart of Spain, the most powerful kingdom. Navarre is up here in the corner, and it's a land of Basques. Now the Basques, B-A-S-Q-U-E, the Basques are people that don't speak an Indo-European language. In other words, their language is totally different from every other European group, mostly, except the Finns and others, I think the Gypsies. Basques are the ones who come up with the corrida. The corrida is the bullfight. Bullfighting starts out as a form of religious animal sacrifice, just like gladiator games in the Etruscan lands and Rome. Eventually, bullfighting, the corrida, becomes the sport of Spain, and it spread to all of Spain's colonies during modern times. Mexico had a strong bullfighting tradition. Now, the point of a bullfight isn't just to kill the animal. That's easy enough with any weapon. If all you're interested in is getting the beef from the bull. A toreador dresses in a classic costume, very tight pants, a special little hat, very colorful vests and shirts with big sleeves. And the toreador carries hooks, a sword, and a red cape. What the toreador is supposed to do is dance with the bull. The red cape and the hooks are to irritate the bull. So if the bull is feeling, the bull is not going to go into the ring feeling placid. Before the fight, the cowboys, the Spanish cowboys, will annoy the bull. And annoying a bull isn't very difficult. You hear about testosterone poisoning. Bulls have it. I've seen it again and again. A little cow grows up into a wonderful calf, friendly little calf, and then he becomes a bull, and you don't trust him. You don't relax around him. He's a bull. He's an alpha herbivore. That's a dangerous thing. So the cowboys will get the bull angry. The bull will come out, and the bull will see the red cape, and the bull will charge. And what the toreador will do is let the bull charge, and then artfully step aside, saying "Ole!" And the crowd will say "Ole!" And he'll put a hook in the bull's back as it goes by, and the hook will stay in the bull's back and cause him to bleed. Not much, just a little. The key to a good bullfight is to prolong this process, to intensify the dance, to put hook after hook after hook into the bull. And then when it's finally when the bull is finally tired and when the bull has spent his force, as the bull comes up, the toreador with a perfect strike goes for the heart of the bull, and the bull dies, and the crowd cheers, and the blood is spent, and sometimes the blood is put on handkerchiefs or whatever and given to people. Now, to Americans, this has always seemed pretty barbarous. Then again, if you ask a Mexican about fishing, a traditional Mexican, they'll say, "Oh, those Norteamericanos, they're barbarians. They hunt fish with hooks, and they won't even eat the fish they catch. They'll throw them back." What kind of sick people do that? It's like, "Here, fishy, 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 whomp! You got part of your face ripped there. Here, go back and swim." Ah! Ah! Americans don't think about that. We say fish don't have pain receptors quite in the same way, but different cultures have different things. The bullfight predates Christianity. It predates the Roman Empire. It's a Basque tradition. There's another thing that comes out of the Basque country of Navarre. Have any of you ever heard of the running of the bulls at Pamplona? Tell me. Oh.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, my dad saw them when he was in Spain, and they'll run the bulls through the streets, and then people will stand on the sides, and then if some crazy person wants an adrenaline rush, they'll run it around.
It's even more than that, but you're right. Imagine a bunch of bulls gotten really angry and set loose in an old medieval city. Do you have something to add?
No.
Okay. You both are in sort of the same line. You both, thank God, are very involved. I appreciate that. So, to this day, manly men who want to demonstrate their manliness to all the other men around, I make fun of it. See the movie City Slickers. It's if you want to see the kind of guys that do it. Anyway, they go to Pamplona at the right season. I think it's autumn. I don't remember. And the bulls have gotten angry, and they're going to go in a certain direction. So what you do is you're on the street. You're not just by the sides. You're on the street waiting for the bulls to come. And then they let the bulls loose. And you run. And I mean you run as fast as you can. Because around you are a group of panicking, stampeding people. Behind you are a group of angry, stampeding bulls. The chance of you tripping and getting trampled by people and or bulls is very high. And the more manly you are, the more you stay in the street ahead of the bulls. And then just as the bulls are going to get to you, you jump over a barricade, the crowd catches you, and I am the manliest man of all because I ran in front of the bulls longer than almost anyone else. Think about this.
Yeah, my dad was in the military, and so it was a military thing. They're like, "Oh, let's all go there." So you can imagine a bunch of Navy guys and stuff running around.
And I'm sure I'm sure the locals bet on how many Navy guys would stick it out.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not, if you care about your survival, you don't do things like that. It's like, I know people who love parachuting. Why anyone would jump out of a perfectly good airplane is beyond me. I don't ski. The thought of putting 2 sticks on my feet and falling down a hill is not fun to me. I've tried skiing. The closest I've come is I've snow tubed. really fast. Skiing, you have more control than snow tubing. And where I was snow tubing, it was glare ice. So if you fell, it hurt. It wasn't pleasant. But no, the running of the bulls is just one of these macho stewed things that you do if you're trying to show everyone how macho you are. Macho is the actual word. So there's Navarre, there's Aragon. These are the Christian Aragon. Why did I call it Aragon? These are the Christian kingdoms, and we'll come back to it with on Tuesday the legend of El Cid. Thank you for your attention. If there are no other questions, and remember, Memorial Day. Give a thought to a fallen soldier, sailor, airman, marine, coast guardsman, or whatever. Bye bye.